Welcome to your personalized deep dive. Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of mechanical precision. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at the screen.
Right, broken or not broken, it's visible, it's categorized, and honestly, it's comforting.
Exactly. But then you step into the world of neurodevelopment and cognitive decline, and that x-ray machine suddenly feels, well, completely useless. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky.
Oh, absolutely. We crave that binary certainty. We want a clear enemy that we can target and fix, but dementia just doesn't work that way.
And that's our mission today. You might be listening to this right now because you want to protect your own brain as you age, or maybe you are supporting a loved one and trying to make sense of a diagnosis that feels entirely overwhelming.
Yeah, and we are going to decode a massive stack of sources for you today. We're pulling from clinical guidelines, neurological research, and some really profound frontline accounts from families.
So our goal is to map out the actual biological mechanisms of dementia, clearly define the chronological stages of decline, provide practical caregiving strategies, and this is the big one, reveal the 14 modifiable risk factors.
Right, which means 45% of dementia cases globally are actually preventable.
That 45% statistic completely shifts the narrative, from inevitable decline to active prevention.
Yeah.
But before we get into how to protect the brain, we need to clear up the biggest misconception out there.
Yeah, people often talk about dementia as if it is a single specific disease.
Right, so think of dementia as a fruit bowl. Dementia is the bowl itself. It's simply an umbrella term for a decline in memory, thinking, and problem-solving severe enough to interfere with your daily life.
So Alzheimer's would be the apple in that bowl. It is the most common type, making up the vast majority of cases. But vascular dementia is the orange, Lewy body is the banana, and frontotemporal is the pear.
Right, and while the fruit might look different on the surface, they're all sitting in that same bowl of cognitive decline.
Exactly. And to understand those external symptoms, we have to look under the microscope at the biological signatures. What is physically happening inside the brain to make the apple different from the orange?
Well, let's start with the apple, Alzheimer's. The mechanism here comes down to two specific proteins acting like microscopic saboteurs.
Yeah, you have beta amyloid proteins that build up in the spaces between the neurons, and they clump together to form these sticky plaques.
Right, and then you have tau proteins. Normally, tau helps maintain the internal transport system of the neuron, kind of like the railroad ties on a track.
But in Alzheimer's, those tau proteins collapse and twist together inside the cell, forming tangles.
Wait, so plaques on the outside and tangles on the inside?
Exactly. And they act as physical roadblocks. They completely short-circuit the electrical and chemical signals traveling between neurons. Without that communication, the neurons just starve and die. And this destruction doesn't just happen randomly. It typically begins in the hippocampus, which functions as your brain's inbox. It's the primary hub for forming and consolidating brand new memories.
Which explains why forgetting a conversation that happened 5 minutes ago is like the classic hallmark of Alzheimer's, even while the person can vividly remember a childhood vacation from 50 years ago.
Right, that old memory is stored in a different part of the brain, but the inbox is broken.
Wait, if millions of these neurons are being killed off by plaques and tangles, does the brain just shrink?
Yes, the brain is actively shrinking. In advanced Alzheimer's, the brain can literally lose up to a third of its total volume. The tissue simply wastes away, leaving massive voids.
That is terrifying. But the destruction looks different with the other fruit in our bowl, right? Take frontotemporal dementia, or FTD.
Yeah, FTD attacks the frontal and temporal lobes, so the areas directly behind your forehead and ears, and it strikes much earlier, usually affecting people under the age of 60.
And because of where it attacks, memory is often completely spared in the beginning. Instead, the frontal lobe damage destroys a person's personality, their impulse control, and their empathy.
The sources highlight some heartbreaking accounts of people making wildly uncharacteristic financial choices or suddenly completely losing their social filter. The brain's executive control room has basically been hijacked.
Then you have Lewy body dementia. This is driven by abnormal clumps of a different protein, alpha-synuclein.
Right, and these clumps disrupt completely different neural pathways. Patients frequently experience vivid visual hallucinations, often seeing animals or children that aren't there.
Wow.
Yeah, along with the severe physical stiffness and tremors that mimic Parkinson's disease.
And finally, vascular dementia operates entirely differently. It's basically a plumbing problem. It occurs when reduced blood flow, often from a series of microscopic silent strokes, starves the brain tissue of oxygen.
So, because the brain is physically changing and shrinking for years before the memory completely fails, the earliest warning signs are subtle. They are often entirely missed or falsely attributed to just, normal aging.
Right. So if you are sitting at home noticing your parents or a partner making odd choices, how do you differentiate between normal age-related forgetfulness and actual early dementia?
Well, let's contrast them. Normal aging is walking into the kitchen, forgetting why you went in there, but remembering it an hour later. Or maybe making a bad financial choice, but recognizing the mistake and learning from it.
But dementia involves a chronic inability to self-correct. It's not just misplacing your keys, it is being completely unable to retrace your steps to find them, or looking at a calendar and having no concept of what season we're currently in.
Exactly. The key is frequency and the total loss of context. But the most alarming hidden signs often have nothing to do with memory. Consider a sudden breakdown in depth perception.
Oh, like a loved one might start bumping into doorways or struggling to figure out how far down the next step on a staircase is.
Yeah, and you naturally assume they just need their eyeglass prescription updated, but their eyes are working perfectly fine.
Right, it's the parietal lobe, the section near the top back of the brain that acts as your internal 3D rendering engine, and it's failing to process spatial geometry. The camera works, but the computer monitor is glitching.
That's a great way to put it. Another crucial hidden sign is the loss of sequential processing. The brain loses the ability to put tasks in chronological order.
I think of it like a broken GPS. Your brain knows the final destination, and it knows the names of all the streets, but it starts feeding you the turn-by-turn directions completely out of order.
Exactly. A person might try to put their underwear over their pants, or they stand in the kitchen entirely unable to cook a meatloaf recipe they have made from memory for 30 years. They have all the ingredients, but they cannot sequence the steps.
And the tragedy of these early signs is compounded by a medical condition known as anosognosia, which basically translates to a literal lack of insight.
Right. The person's brain undergoes physical damage that erases its ability to perceive its own deficits. Families frequently assume their loved one is being stubborn, defensive, or just in denial about their memory loss.
But they're not. The part of the brain required to recognize the impairment is broken
Thank you, Jeff.
genuinely cannot see the problem.
Right.
But hold on, I saw in our notes that losing your sense of smell is a warning sign. How on earth is my nose connected to my brain shrinking?
I know, it sounds like a massive leap. But the olfactory bulb, which processes smell, sits right above your nasal cavity and wires directly into the brain's memory and emotion centers.
So it completely bypasses the usual relay stations other senses use.
Exactly. And because of this direct physical highway, a declining sense of smell correlates strongly with gray matter shrinkage in those critical frontal and temporal lobes.
Oh, wow. So if someone rapidly loses the ability to identify familiar, distinct scents like coffee or an orange, it acts as a canary in the coal mine.
Yes, it often precedes cognitive decline by years.
So the warning signs are there if you know what you're looking at. Once these signs become undeniable, doctors have to formalize the diagnosis and track the progression. How is this actually measured?
Well, they turn to standardized clinical models. The DSM-5 is the standard text. It evaluates specific cognitive domains like language, executive function, and social cognition.
But clinically, doctors rely heavily on measuring a person's physical capabilities, right? They look at ADLs, or activities of daily living, which include fundamental survival tasks like feeding, bathing, and dressing.
Yeah, and they also measure IADLs, instrumental activities, which are the more complex tasks required to live independently, like managing a bank account or grocery shopping.
Now, there are a few ways to map this journey. Some clinicians use a broad three-stage model: preclinical, mild cognitive impairment, and dementia.
But the most granular, detailed way to understand the chronological flow of this disease is the 7-stage Global Deterioration Scale, or GDS. Mapping this out is critical for families trying to understand what comes next.
So, stages 1 and 2 cover the preclinical phase and age-associated memory impairment. Biologically, brain cells are actively dying. Those plaques and tangles are accumulating silently, often for a decade or more.
Yet the person functions normally. Any slight memory lapses are easily hidden or brushed off as being tired or stressed.
But the tipping point arrives at stage 3, mild cognitive impairment, or MCI. This is where the short-term memory slips become undeniable to close family members.
And anxiety frequently sets in here because the person usually retains enough awareness to realize something is slipping. To cope, they start aggressively marking their trail.
Right, they might cover their desk in sticky notes or rely heavily on phone reminders just to keep their life anchored.
Then stage 4 transitions into early dementia, representing a moderate cognitive decline. This is when those complex IADLs like managing finances or planning a trip become overwhelming.
A classic clinical assessment at this stage asks the patient to count backward from 100 by sevens. And the reason that specific math test fails in stage 4 is because it relies on working memory.
Exactly. You have to hold the current number in your head while simultaneously performing a new subtraction equation on it. As the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex shrink, that mental scratch pad completely disappears.
Moving to stage 5, the mid-stage, marks a massive loss of independence. The person now requires daily assistance to survive. The timeline of their life just fragments.
Yeah, they might not know their current address, the name of the president, or even what season it is. Something as routine as choosing weather-appropriate clothing becomes a daily puzzle they just cannot solve.
Yeah, stage 6 is moderately severe decline, and this is where the loss of personality truly takes hold. This stage brings obsessive behaviors, paranoia, and delusions. Wandering becomes a serious physical danger.
This is also when caregivers face the brunt of sundowning. As the afternoon turns to evening, the patient experiences severe agitation and confusion. The brain's internal clock is breaking down, causing intense anxiety as the light fades.
And finally, stage 7, late or severe decline. The brain essentially forgets how to operate the physical body. It stops sending the signals required to walk, to sit up, to form words, and eventually to swallow.
It is a devastating trajectory, and the sources point out a crucial physical reality about this progression. It is not a smooth, predictable downward slope.
Right, it operates more like a stairway. Patients will often maintain a plateau for a long period, managing a specific level of function. Then they experience a sudden, sharp drop.
And that drop is almost always triggered by a secondary external stressor, like a minor fall, change in medication, or very commonly, a urinary tract infection.
Oh, because the immune system's inflammatory response overwhelms the fragile brain. They recover from the infection, but they plateau again at a permanently lower level of cognitive function.
Exactly. And as a loved one descends down that stairway into stages 5, 6, and 7, the sheer weight of survival shifts entirely to the family.
Caregivers are forced to manage a daily reality that tests the limits of human endurance. How do they manage without breaking down?
Well, managing this requires profound practical adjustments to the environment. When the personality changes and mood swings escalate, caregivers must internalize that arguing is entirely counterproductive.
Because you cannot logic away structural brain damage. Correcting their reality only breeds more agitation.
Right. Instead, you intervene non-medically through the environment. You reduce visual and auditory clutter in the house to help their narrowing brain focus on one task at a time. You simplify instructions into single steps.
You anchor them with strict, unwavering daily routines. And to combat that sundowning agitation we talked about, you dramatically flood the house with bright artificial lighting as the afternoon turns to evening.
Yeah, it artificially forces their broken circadian rhythm to stay awake and calm.
But beyond the practical environment, there is the devastating challenge of maintaining an emotional connection when the person loses language and stops recognizing their own spouse.
The sources highlight a profoundly moving 60-minute segment featuring Carol and Mike Daly. Even when Carol reached the point where she could no longer speak or recognize her own living room, Mike found ways to reach her.
He reached her through touch, through exaggerated facial expressions, and most incredibly, through music. When he placed headphones on Carol and played her favorite songs from her youth, her entire demeanor transformed.
She lit up. Music is uniquely powerful because it's processed across a wide distributed network in the brain, including deep emotional centers like the amygdala, which often resist the plaques and tangles far longer than the hippocampus.
So music acts as a backdoor to the soul when the front door of language is locked.
It really does. It provides a fleeting but beautiful moment of connection. Now, as the disease advances into the final stages, caregiving shifts from behavioral management to intense medical intervention.
Right, as the brain stops signaling the body, specialists like speech-language pathologists become critical. We naturally associate speech pathologists with helping stroke victims regain language, but in late-stage dementia, their primary focus shifts entirely to the mechanics of the throat.
Yeah, they become the experts in swallowing mechanics. In late-stage dementia, patients develop dysphagia, an inability to coordinate the complex muscle movements required to swallow.
And if food or thin liquids go down the wrong pipe and enter the lungs, it introduces bacteria, causing aspiration pneumonia.
Which is actually one of the leading causes of death in dementia patients. So the speech pathologist evaluates the swallow function and alters the physical consistency of the patient's diet, prescribing thickened liquids or pureed foods.
Just to slow down the transit time and protect the lungs.
Exactly.
And as the body naturally begins to shut down at the very end of life, it enters a state of ketosis, right? The body essentially runs out of its usual fuel, glucose, and begins burning its own fat stores for energy.
Right, and this chemical shift produces ketones. These ketones actually cross into the brain and act as a natural, mild anesthetic, dulling pain, and creating a sense of euphoria that helps facilitate a peaceful end-of-life process.
The patient finds peace, but the toll on the caregiver witnessing this slow decline is absolute. I mean, how does a caregiver survive the chronic, ambiguous grief of losing a spouse who is technically still breathing right in front of them?
It's brutal. Caregiver burnout is a severe, quantifiable medical crisis. In that same 60 Minutes story, Mike Daly, a tough former New York City police officer, openly admitted to having suicidal thoughts.
Wow.
The isolation, the profound sleep deprivation, and the constant hypervigilance are entirely consuming. Caregivers must understand that this level of chronic stress triggers massive cortisol release, which is literally life-threatening to their own bodies.
So it is imperative that they balance their own health and actively seek outside intervention, whether that involves hiring home care aides, utilizing adult day programs, or eventually moving the patient to a memory care facility.
Absolutely. Seeking professional help is a necessary survival strategy, not a failure of love.
So we have walked through the harsh biology, the stages of decline, and the heavy practical realities of caregiving. The reality of end-stage dementia is harrowing, but the 2024 report from the Lancet Commission brings a massive beacon of hope to this narrative.
Yes, they concluded that nearly half, 45% of all dementia cases globally are preventable.
Preventable, based on 14 specific modifiable risk factors. This research proves that we are not entirely powerless against this disease. So let's talk about the big 14.
Let's do it.
Some of the mechanisms behind them are truly surprising. Let's start with sensory input. Hearing and vision loss. Untreated hearing loss raises your dementia risk by a staggering 50%.
Because the brain is an engine that runs on electrical input. If your auditory or visual inputs begin to narrow, say you develop cataracts or refuse to wear hearing aids, the specific regions of your brain responsible for processing those complex signals stop receiving stimulation.
So the brain basically operates on a ruthless use-it-or-lose-it economy.
Exactly. Without stimulation, those unused neural networks physically atrophy and shrink.
Next is sleep. Now, it is tempting to brush off waking up at 3 a.m. as just, an annoying side effect of getting older.
Oh, but it's not. Chronic poor sleep is a massive neurological risk factor. Sleep is the only time the brain activates its glymphatic system. Think of the glymphatic system as the brain's overnight pressure washer.
So it's literally washing the brain.
Yeah, during deep, slow-wave sleep, the brain cells actually shrink slightly, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to rush through the tissue. It physically washes away the metabolic waste produced during the day, specifically those toxic beta amyloid and tau proteins we discussed earlier.
So if you are chronically sleep deprived, the cleaning crew never gets to work and the microscopic trash just accumulates.
Precisely.
Then we look at muscle mass and sarcopenia. The sources literally state that sitting is the new smoking.
It really is. When you contract your muscles through resistance training or even brisk walking, those muscles release special hormones called myokines.
And these myokines travel through the bloodstream, cross into the brain, and actively protect neurons from inflammation and decay. Just 10 minutes of deliberate daily movement generates these protective chemicals.
It's incredible, and the remaining factors on the Lancet's list illustrate just how deeply interconnected our vascular and neurological systems are. High visceral fat, high LDL cholesterol, diabetes, and hypertension all do the same underlying damage.
They compromise the microvessels feeding the brain. High blood sugar and high blood pressure physically damage the delicate internal lining of these blood vessels, acting as a slow-motion accelerator for vascular dementia by basically starving the brain of oxygen.
And air pollution operates similarly. Fine particulate matter, known as PM2.5, is inhaled into the lungs, enters the bloodstream, and can actually cross the blood-brain barrier.
And once inside, it triggers a chronic inflammatory response that damages neurons. Then there are the psychological and social factors: depression, social isolation, and low education.
Depression is particularly insidious. Chronic depression floods the brain with cortisol, a stress hormone that has been shown to physically shrink the hippocampus if left untreated.
Wow. And social isolation deprives the brain of its most complex cognitive task, which is reading human emotion and holding spontaneous conversation.
Right. And low education essentially refers to a lack of lifelong learning, which leaves the brain without a backup system. Add in smoking, excessive alcohol consumption, and traumatic brain injury, and you have the complete list of 14 factors.
So the actionable takeaway for you listening is crystal clear. If you want to protect your brain architecture for the future, you need to manage your waistline today. Get your blood pressure and blood sugar checked.
Treat depression as the serious neurological condition it is. Put the phone away an hour before bed so you can achieve that slow-wave sleep.
Pick up demanding books to challenge your neural pathways.
Yeah.
And absolutely go get your hearing and vision checked.
Yeah, dementia remains an incredibly cruel and complex umbrella of diseases, but it is not a universally inevitable part of aging. We understand the biological stages and the earliest hidden warning signs better than ever before.
Right.
We know how to adapt our environments to support those suffering, and most importantly, we know how to intervene long before the first memory slips.
We do. And there is a final concept here that ties all of this prevention together, which is cognitive reserve. Imagine your brain as a sprawling city's road network. As biological aging naturally occurs, it is inevitable that certain streets will get shut down for construction.
But a brain with high cognitive reserve has built a massive network of alternate routes. You build that reserve today by learning a second language, staying intensely socially engaged, mastering a new instrument, or forcing yourself to navigate your hometown without relying on a GPS.
So when the plaques and tangles eventually shut down one road, a brain with high reserves simply reroutes the signal down a different path. Your brain is not just a passive victim waiting for aging to happen. It is an active, dynamic participant, shaped directly by the physical and mental inputs you feed it right now. The diagnostic landscape of the human brain might be infinitely more complex than a simple broken bone on an X-ray, but we are not flying blind.
We possess the tools to build new roads before the old ones ever collapse.
The only question left is, what new route will you build in your brain today?